mic check, please.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings.
I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
My name is John Gordon. I'll be your host.
And I'm your host, Katie Burke.
Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. The DU Podcast, sponsored by Purina Pro Plan, the official performance dog food of Ducks Unlimited. Purina Pro Plan, always advancing.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings. Joining me today is Will Brantley. Will, how's it going, man? Welcome to the DU podcast.
Jennings, it's good, man. It's good talking to you.
Now, Will is the hunting editor of Field and Stream. He's also the editor of RealTreeOutdoors.com. And Will also used to work for Ducks Unlimited magazine. So Will and I have known each other for quite some time. Also, we have also been on some adventures basically all across North America, several from Louisiana to Saskatchewan. We have hunted ducks together and hung out and had good times. But I wanted to bring Will on here today. And really, he wrote a piece for Ducks Unlimited magazine last year called Divers the Hard Way. And it's really, it's a really in-tune diving duck hunting piece, but really, it's kind of how basically the conversation that we're going to have is really how he hunts on Kentucky Lake. And then we're going to kind of probably drift into some random conversations that we always do. But Will, the first thing that I like to do with everyone who comes on the show for the first time is really kind of introduce yourself to our audience, just who you are, what you do, how you got into hunting. And I know we've talked offline before we started this thing. You kind of drifted out of duck hunting for a little while for a reason, but maybe you're getting back in. But I think it's just a really cool conversation to have. So, really just kind of introduce yourself to our audience.
All right. Well, all that wind up there, Jennings, was like a long way of saying you and I are starting to get a little bit old.
Yeah, exactly right.
So no, I live in Western Kentucky and have lived here all my life, except for the 2 years that my wife Michelle and I lived down in Memphis whenever I did work for Ducks Unlimited, and that's been a minute ago now. But It was time that we look back, and it was a really good time. We enjoyed. I really enjoyed working for the organization, and and we enjoyed living in Memphis and doing some of the things down there. But ultimately, Western Kentucky was home for us. So yeah, that's where I grew up. Not a real big waterfowling epicenter, especially I live kind of right on Kentucky Lake now, and the duck hunting here can be decent. But I grew up actually about an hour and a half northeast of here around Dawson Springs. And it was pretty slim pickings around there, on the duck and goose front. We did have, there were some beaver sloughs and creeks and things. And but I hunted everything there was to hunt really around there when I was a kid. I was always really into it. But my dad was a big quail hunter. And that's kind of what I grew up doing. On the shotgun sport front, we quail hunted, and we dove hunted and stuff too. But I think I was in high school when some buddies and I decided that we wanted to try to get into duck hunting. And, we some of the creeks had gotten out and we'd seen some ducks, in farmers' fields and things. And that's kind of how I first started dabbling in it. And I remember, my dad did have like a dozen old duck decoys, and we'd load them up in like a horse feed sack and take them out there and hunt. And, we killed a duck here or there, but I really got into it and started getting into the style of duck hunting that I enjoy now whenever I came to college at Murray State University. And it was a good place to be if you like to hunt and fish. Like I say, it was right here next to Kentucky Lake and land between the lakes. And so, the deer hunting was good, and the fishing was good, and the turkey hunting was pretty good. But that's where I started. I guess that's probably where I saw my first diving ducks. Back then there were a lot of buffleheads and bluebills in particular that came in here, and I got to know some local folks around here who were a little bit older than me. They were out of college, but still pretty young, early 20s, and started kind of palling around with them a little bit. And the first diver spreads we made were with old mallard decoys that we spray painted black and white. And man, we shot a lot of ducks off those things. We used to have like a little 2-man scamp pond, bass boat that we would take and pile that thing up with our makeshift diver decoys and put a trolling motor on the back of it. And, and we'd hunt, points that were, stuff that was close to shore that we wouldn't have to get out on the open water. And like I say, we shot a lot of ducks back in those days, and we shot divers. But, back in those days, close to 20 years ago now, Kentucky Lake had there was a lot of aquatic vegetation on the lake that's really hadn't been there in quite a few years. But, and you'd get a lot of puddle ducks there, especially early in the season. A lot of gadwalls, and a lot of teal, and some mallards. Really just kind of a mixed bag of everything. A lot of wedging. Yeah, that's kind of, I guess, really like where I cut my teeth. Learning to set decoys and call, and then as I got out of school and got my first job, one of the first things that that I bought was a boat, and started learning a little bit about running that big water. And again, like I had older, friends who were really mentors that taught me a lot of that stuff, and kind of taught me the rules of the road, so to speak, out there on that big water. And we kind of graduated to hunting, islands and things, and running and freelancing. And I just fell in love with that style of hunting, that open water, public land style of hunting, which of course is, best in the wintertime. And, and that's kind of my duck hunting background. And then, a few years after I graduated college, I started out, I always wanted to be an outdoor writer. And I've majored in journalism whenever I went to Murray State, kind of with that plan, and had some good opportunities when I was in school. I did an internship for 2 summers, actually, for Outdoor Life magazine, and did a couple of outdoor columns, one for the collegiate newspaper, the Murray State News, and one for my hometown newspaper, the Dawson Springs Progress, and started freelancing a little bit here and there. And during that time, I actually met Wade Bourne.
I was getting ready to mention. I was going to say, you were really tied into Wade Bourne, pretty close with him. Yeah. And so I was. So Wade lived in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is about 45 minutes from where I live right now. I live right on the Tennessee-Kentucky state line. And, I had grown up watching Wade on TV. Southern Outdoors, and of course he was host of Ducks Unlimited TV. And, and I read his articles, and I knew he was in my area. But to me, like, when I was a kid thinking of what I wanted to be when I grew up, like, Wade was the iconic guy. He was the outdoor writer. He was the video guy. He was the guy that just lived the life. And you could just tell, like, Wade was passionate about all of it. He loved to deer hunt. He loved to duck hunt. He loved to turkey hunt and fish. And he was just, kind of the guy that I looked up to. And I remember I was sitting in a cubicle in New York City. I think I was 19 years old, and was at the Outdoor Life offices, and they were at 2 Park Avenue in Manhattan at the time. That's a long way from Murray. Man, it's a long ways from Dawson Springs, Kentucky. That's right. I'll tell you. But anyway, I was sitting in a cubicle, probably fact checking an article. Like back then, they would they ran a lot of phone numbers in articles back then. Obviously online articles now run a lot of hyperlinks, but back then, there were phone numbers to companies and hunting guides and fishing guides and, products that were mentioned. Like, they didn't really tease websites so much as they ran the company's phone numbers. And one of my main jobs as an intern was to call and check those phone numbers, be sure they were, accurate, like not going to, an adult hotline or something. So I sat there as an intern, making these phone calls all the time, and it was pretty mundane work, but just for Outdoor Life, So anyway, I was learning the ropes of the magazine like that, sitting in this cubicle, and there were guests and stuff coming in and out of the offices at times, and
I remember hearing Wade Bourne's voice. Of course, Wade had a, pretty loud, powerful voice, but I mean, he was just unmistakable. I mean, he was a radio guy. You knew when it was Wade talking. I mean, you could hear him from the other side of a building. You know what I mean? And I remember hearing Wade's voice in the Outdoor Life's office, and I was like, man, that is Wade Bourne. And sure enough, he and Becky come around the corner. Well, Wade was really good friends and colleagues with Colin Moore, who was the executive editor of Outdoor Life at the time. And Colin was actually from Kentucky. And he's the one who kind of coordinated my internship with me. And so I met Wade there in that office. And, I was starstrucken when I met him. But I mean, he was just such a nice guy and so generous, and was really interested in the fact that I was from his general area and was up there in New York, trying to learn the ropes and wanted to be an outdoor writer. And, Wade really took me under his wing, and was very, went out of his way really to try to help me when I was young, to, let me know of opportunities and things. And, would, in this business, a lot of times it's who you know. It's an outdoor business is pretty small, and Wade would pass my name along. And, after a few years out of college, he passed my name along to Tom Fulgham, who was the editor of Ducks Unlimited magazine at the time. They were looking to hire an associate editor, and Wade actually called me and asked if I would be interested in applying for that, and of course I was, and that's how I ended up at DU for a couple of years.
That's really funny, and I've told you this story before, but our timelines are very similar, and it's actually funny hearing you say that, because I actually applied for that position, the associate editor position for Ducks Unlimited magazine. And that would have been in like 2007. Is that right? Is that 2000,
Yep.
Maybe 2008, right around in there. And I got the phone call from Tom Fulgham, except my phone call from Tom Fulgham was, you did not get the position. Because you did. So it's actually really funny hearing you say that, because you got the position, but then he was like, hey, Tom was great magazine editor, awesome. And he's like, hey, you did not get the position, but I'm going to pass your name along to someone else in our communications department. And so I ended up getting hired as a communications specialist in the PR side of things. And you were the associate editor. So we kind of started pretty close to the same time, but we were both applying for the same position. I find that just to be hilarious how it all comes together. It's pretty funny. That's great.
Man, and those were good times. I mean, we had a lot of fun. I mean, you and I both were pretty young guys, and we, the waterfowl hunter parties were a new thing back then. And I remember putting together the crawfish boil there in Memphis, and doing those parties and hanging out. And it was just I always tell folks, I mean, DU was a great company to work for, a great brand to work for. And then of course, Tom, was an awesome magazine editor. Mm-hmm. He definitely wasn't an easy magazine editor. No. He was pretty rigid, but man, he was 100% fair. And he was one of the guys. I can think of a few magazine editors, a couple of guys at Field and Stream, and actually a writing professor that I had in college, and Tom Fulgham are folks that I look to who really helped me improve my writing. I can really look at that and say, yeah, they were kind of tough to work under. You sort of felt under the gun, but man, it was kind of a tough love sort of thing. They were really good at what they did.
Yeah, no, Tom was definitely one of those people when you turn something in, an article, like you were nervous. Yeah. Because there's a chance that he's going to tell you like, this is awful. Like, oh gosh, like this is bad. God. Yeah. You like send it to him, and then you're like holding your breath, like waiting. So yeah, no, I totally get that. Totally hear. Yeah, you and I have had some pretty good adventures as well. I mean, I think we did a Canada trip. Man, gosh, that would have been probably 2010. It was right after you left DU.
Yep.
And we did that Canada trip where I don't think I doubt I'll ever experience that same thing, where you and I were on a little pothole and we realized that there were just thousands of canvasbacks coming in on us. And you looked at me and you're like, we're going to shoot our canvasbacks today. And by gosh, we did. It was awesome.
Man, it was a great hunt. I had, it was one of the more enjoyable waterfowl hunts, trips that I've been on. And I think a lot of what made that one so much fun was we were kind of left to our own devices, because we went up there. Really, I think that, I think the outfitter was kind of a snow goose.
He's a goose guy,
specialized in hunting fields, and man, it was just torrential rain to the point where we it basically canned our whole, our plans for the whole week. I mean, we couldn't get a vehicle into a field, but there are all these little DU projects, all these little wetlands around. And, after about a day of sitting in the lodge, drinking beer and talking, I think we kind of just got sick of it. We're like, hey, can we get some duck decoys and go hunt these potholes? And he's like, yeah, you can try.
He had about 10 decoys.
He had about 10 decoys. And man, those potholes were really good. And yeah, just full of canvasbacks and gadwalls.
Yep.
I think that was the flavor of the trip. And it was just a lot of fun. We shot those ducks in the pouring down rain.
Yeah.
So.
No, that was a good one for sure. I'll never forget that. I think we both shot our canvasbacks and we're just like, this is unbelievable, like literally unbelievable. Like there's so many ducks. It was very, kind of one of those, like you said, it's just one of those trips where you look back on it like, man, I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that again in the same capacity.
Yep.
It's just very interesting.
For sure.
Stay tuned to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, sponsored by Purina Pro Plan, after these messages.
I got you on here to talk about the diving ducks thing, and you kind of touched on it. But I think one thing you touched on there on Kentucky Lake is fantastic. If anyone's never been there, like you're missing out. But one thing about Kentucky Lake, that's big water. That's dangerous water. Is that something that, when you kind of look back on you're getting your start, like you mentioned, you're doing like a 2-man bass boat, those little those little plastic things, like do you kind of look back on that like, dang, like we were pushing it there a little bit, and then you moved into a bigger boat and you're probably much better off. But just when you started out, I mean, did you kind of look back on that like, dang, like we were doing some pretty dangerous things, because that's dangerous hunting up there?
Yeah, I think back on it pretty often, especially now that I'm a dad. As a matter of fact, I think the last time that I was on Kentucky Lake duck hunting with a buddy, we got ready to head back to shore, and we kind of looked at each other and both grabbed life jackets and put them on. And when I was in my 20s, I'd have never let my buddies see me do that. And I mean, it's nothing but pure pig-headedness. But I remember my buddy was like, yeah, I'm not too tough to die anymore. So
yeah,
I mean, seriously, I mean, it's like any big water. I mean, it's extremely dangerous in the wintertime. When the duck hunting is at its best, you basically have to think of a 30-foot deep windswept river that's, a mile wide, and it's 20 degrees outside or colder. I mean, you basically have to think of that as like, if you go in, it's like lava. You have not quite like lava, but you have a very real chance of not surviving that. And I mean, year after year after year, every year, I mean, there are tragic stories of duck hunters who drown on that lake. Same as, like I say, any other big waterway. I mean, the Mississippi River or even out west, the Columbia River. I mean, there are a lot of pretty tragic stories. And I mean, with duck hunting in particular, you end up with small boats with a lot of people and a lot of decoys and dogs and want a lot of gear. They're overloaded, and you want to be out there on the most inclement days. And Kentucky Lake in particular, of course, it's an impoundment of the Tennessee River. And then, I mean, the same goes for Lake Barkley, which is right there next to it. It's an impoundment of the Cumberland River. But, those lakes run almost due north and south. And, the days that you want to duck hunt with a good brisk north wind, that 15 mile an hour north wind, it doesn't take much of a north or south wind to get those lakes really rough in a hurry, because they just have a lot of room for those waves to build. And then because they are impoundments, it's not like it's just the areas that you want to duck on. It's not like it's just straight river channel. They're sandbars and sunken islands and sunken houses and just a lot of stuff that you can hit. And I mean, I think back about us, wading around some of those points, that were up to the tops of our chest waders and using a little bass boat, the little plastic bass boats and things, and trying to fish in diver decoys with long sticks and, and chasing, wounded bluebills that are diving on us and trying to, chase them down with a trolling motor. And it's a wonder I'm alive, after doing some of that. But, that is part of the, I think that's part of the allure of diver hunting too, is that little bit of adventure that goes with it, that big water stuff. And I mean, man, there's, the layout hunting. My buddy Tim and I bought a layout boat. It was pretty, I might have still been at Ducks Unlimited. If I wasn't, it was right after I left. But we went in, we bought a used Mighty Layout Boys as a single man boat. And I mean, we had done a ton of diver hunting, setting up on points and things. But I mean, you don't have to hunt divers for long to look out there in the open water and be like, man, if I could be out there, things would change, because divers learn pretty quickly to avoid, points and islands. And really what I found is anywhere where they're flying and they can see the bottom, Kentucky Lake's really clear. And so you almost need to have any success on divers at all. You really need to be hunting water that is at minimum, waist deep. And sometimes that's hard to find on, hunting the points and things. And so we got the layout boat and, read articles and things and started, rigging long line decoys, basically like catfish trot lines and started just really through trial and error. And some of the biggest error was learning how to tow the layout boat out there behind our, behind our War Eagle duck boats, without capsizing the thing. And, but man, like getting out there with stepping off into that layout boat on the edge of a secondary creek channel or whatever and being 100 yards from any shore, and anchored in 15 feet of water, and having that wind blowing and your buddy leaves you, in the big boat and you're out there, basically, left adrift, you're anchored out, but you've got the decoys, you're in the decoy spread and having, a flight of canvasbacks or bluebills or golden eyes or whatever it is, they commit so completely, to a layout spread. It's not the picking up and skirting the spread at 40 yards. I mean, it's you're raising up to shoot them at, 10 feet. Yeah. And I mean, really just looking at every detail on a drake. I mean, it's just, there's nothing like it in duck hunting as far as I'm concerned.
No. And you can see their eyes. Yep. And that's the Mighty Layout boat. That's the same one that I borrowed, right?
Yes. Yep,
okay. Yep. I was going to say, I drove up to Kentucky and borrowed this boat and actually hunted, and I know I told you about it, hunted the big oxbows off the Mississippi River in this thing, and it was fantastic. But the funny part about it is, the guys down here, they had no idea what we were doing. They were confused as to, there were other hunters on the lake. I think there are even fishermen out there. But it's January. We're in Mississippi, one of the big oxbows off of the Mississippi River right there. It's
They're
actually
looking down our nose thinking you're obviously a bunch of Yankees.
That's exactly right. And nobody would go with me. I had my boat, I had a 20-foot Sea Arc center console. It's more than capable of big water. But I could not get anybody. Everyone's like, no, I'm not going to shoot divers off of Moon Lake is where I was in Mississippi. And I convinced there were two guys who were interning in conservation. One of them actually is now the senior policy director for Delta Waterfowl, Cyrus Baird. I convinced them to go. I think they only went because they didn't have any other option. They're just like, yeah, we'll go. And we ended up going down there and we hammered bluebills, redheads. I think we shot a bunch of green wings too. Yeah. But we would take turns. I'd basically one guy in the tender boat going back and forth. I mean, you'd get in that thing and you're done. You had your ducks in 10 minutes. It was unbelievable. And for people who've never done layout boat style hunting, people always ask oh, what's it like? And I'm like, I try to think about it, like you had described, you're out there, you're alone. The water's lapping up against the side of the boat. You're half wet, wind, you're in 20, 30 feet of water maybe, and I always tell people that style of hunting it's personal. Yeah. And I don't know if that's a good way to describe it. But I always feel like you said, they're landing 5 feet from you and you get to look at every detail of that duck. And so it's almost like deer hunting, and you're a much bigger deer hunter than I am. I grew up deer hunting, but it's the same thing. You're by yourself, it's just you. When you go to shoot there's nobody backing you up. There's no, like if you shoot 3 times and miss, like there's no one there to help you out. It's like, that's it. So I just find it's super interesting that you got into that, especially on Kentucky Lake. But I just don't, are there other people that are doing that, or did you ever see anyone else doing that?
We never saw anybody else doing that. I think there've been people who dabbled in it here and there. I mean, obviously it's a big lake, you can't see what everybody else is doing. But I mean, for the most part, I mean, the hunting done on Kentucky Lake is still your, more your typical Southern style,
Yeah.
A lot of boat blinds and things like that. And doing what we used to do, pulling up on islands and things. And, and it's so, the layout hunting is so labor and equipment intensive.
Yeah.
The new can wear off of it pretty quick on days when the ducks aren't flying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, you can have your days where you're sitting in a layout boat, watching the open water, and then you've got nobody to talk to and no coffee to drink. So like, the very worst days of duck hunting, minus all the camaraderie and fun that goes with it.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it ends up. But yeah, I mean, it's man, when it works, it's something. I mean, one of the things that always struck me about it, the first time I was in it, I think I had some bluebills just come ripping in, and I raise up and just whiff on them at 10 yards, and and I'm like, man, and like you say, you're looking around to see if anybody's laughing at you, because I mean, you realize how close those ducks were and how easy that shot should have been, but it's kind of like, it's a lot like shooting out of a layout blind in the field, and that it really forces you to focus on your mechanics, of shotgun mount, and you got to just sit up before you shoot and all of that. But one of the cool things about the layout boat is those ducks are so fully committed that most of the time you can raise up and shoulder your gun, and I mean really take your time, and they never even. It's almost like they never even check up. They don't flare. It's like at that point they're expecting movement in the spread. I don't know, but it is something unique to that style of hunting that I've learned. I mean, they're just you can really be pretty deliberate, and as in most things, duck shooting, that's ultimately what makes you successful. But you can be even more so, it seems like, in a layout boat.
Yeah, no, I mean it's something that's so unique that for anyone who's not done it, I would recommend it. But you mentioned it can go bad pretty quick as far as if the ducks aren't working and you're out there. It's like you said, it's labor intensive, it's gear intensive. You're dedicating a lot of time and effort to it, and when it doesn't work out, it sucks. There's no other way to say it.
Oh man, like I remember one morning I had one of my editors at Field and Stream. I was on staff at Field and Stream at the time, and but working remotely from Kentucky still, and he came down to hunt with me, and it should have been just a perfect morning. It was blistering cold, it was windy, I mean everything should have been, and it was just one of those days we just couldn't get anything to work right. And man, I was in the tender boat, and I don't remember what I was trying to do. I think I was trying to adjust a long line, and ended up wrapping one of the long lines up in the prop of my outboard, and I mean just sucking all these decoys up in there. And I'm out there hanging over the back of the boat, trying to unwrap these things,
cussing,
ice water, cussing. It was just, and and I can remember my editor saying, "Man, it's good to see our hunting editor out there in his element." So.
Yeah, being a pro, you know exactly what you're doing.
Anyway, that sort of stuff happens to everyone, but it happens a lot, in layout hunting. And those are the type things too, obviously, in that open water like that. That's how a situation can turn dangerous. So.
Yeah, we'll kind of shift gears here a little bit, and because we're kind of pushing on time, but for all the, like you mentioned, the dangers of it, what you're doing, I have these conversations a lot, and you and I are both in the same boat as far as we both have kids who are right there in the mix, like trying to either get them involved in this or having them with us. I know your son Ance hunts with you a lot, big deer hunter, and my daughter Charlie, she likes to get out, get after it. How does that, having your kid with you, how does that kind of change your mindset on all of this? Like everything that you're doing, whether it's fishing, hunting, whatever, but for me, it definitely changes the whole game. I'm not going out there and, really getting after it as much as I am trying to get her in a position to succeed. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of is that kind of how you approach this as well?
My wife, Michelle, and I mean, she's a huge hunter and outdoors person. And I mean, through all those formative years, when we were living in Memphis and, when I was really hitting the layout, hunting hard on Kentucky, I mean, she was out there with me a lot. And so she has seen firsthand all of the things, and really enjoys it. And so when Ance was born, and really as soon as he got old enough to walk, it was just really no question, between us, we were going to continue living our life the way that we had always lived it and doing the things that we always enjoyed. And, maybe there'll come a time when Ance is older that he decides he doesn't want to hunt and fish and doesn't like it. But right now he's not going to have the option because he's just going to go,
Yep.
And so we have just always taken him to do everything, even when he was way too little to shoot, we'd take him out turkey hunting and we had a little camo sleeping bag, we'd stuff him in that sleeping bag and, I'd set him between my knees and call up a turkey and shoot with him sitting between my knees, and so we just always took him along to do everything. And I think because of that, that's just become the expectation.
Yeah.
It's very, very rare that we go do really anything and leave him behind. And I've taken him on some, he's traveled a bit to hunt big game in a lot of places and always goes with me. And, and he's shot a lot of deer and turkeys and stuff. But one of the things that, pretty quickly when we realized how passionate he was about things, I mean, Michelle and I just sort of discussed it and said, hey, look, he's too little to go duck hunting on Kentucky Lake the way that we like to do it. And I would probably push the issue a little bit more, but I mean, Michelle, having seen it and having, seen headlines every year of hunters drowning and boats capsizing and things, she has been firm that he's just not going to do that.
Yeah.
Not until he's older.
Yeah.
And not until he's able to get the boat out of a bad situation or whatever, needs to be done. And I respect that.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I haven't quit hunting, divers, but I have, I've kind of taken a pause on it because, there's a lot of other things that we're really interested in the wintertime. We run a trap line and, do late season deer hunting and squirrel hunting. And there's a lot of other stuff that we can do. And so, for the last couple of years, I have kind of put a pause on my big water duck hunting, just because, I hate to leave my kid at home, honestly. And he's just not ready to get out there and do that with me. It's too dangerous. But we've got a deer lease in Texas that it's in central Texas. And there's a lot of kind of like you get in that area, that there's a lot of stock tanks on this lease. And, if folks listening have done much waterfowl hunting in Texas, like those stock tanks can get a lot of ducks on them. And we did do some jump shooting on them last year and shot a lot of birds. And we set up and did a little decoy hunt one morning and decoyed in some gadwalls. And he got to see that. And he was really fascinated by it. He's fascinated by the birds and I mean, Ance is, he loves to shoot and all that, but I would say more than anything, like he's into the critters. He wants to know about the wildlife and like he is in awe of how impressive a mallard drake looks. He's just like, man, like why do they have these curly feathers on their butts? I'm like, I don't know, but it's cool, So I mean, and so, I mean, he was really into it. And then, I mean, obviously he's then asking a lot of questions about, the diving ducks that we have mounted on the wall at home. Where did you kill that goldeneye? Where'd you kill that canvasback? Where'd you kill that scoter? And so, there'll come a time, hopefully where I introduce him to that. But, right now we're still just, just a little bit young and a little bit small, but that'll change soon enough.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're not too far. I mean, he's going to be ready to go here probably in 3 or 4 years for something like that. But
yeah,
what's interesting is we have these same conversations, my wife and I, and like when I'm taking Charlie to duck camp or whatever, it's not really. The conversations are not always, you think, like you mentioned, Ance is too young to go out in the layout boat. And, he couldn't drive the tender boat by himself, But also kind of the conversations that we have, which I think is really good for kids, is like, what if something happens to you? And like, so you kind of broach these conversations with kids and 9, 10 years old. I mean, they're young, but like, hey, if something happens to me, here's what you do.
Yep.
You know, so you have those conversations. And I think that all of that just kind of pays dividends as they get older. You know, they're a little more prepared. I don't know, like maybe than some other kids, but you know, we have those conversations of it's just me and her at duck camp and we're in a pit and something were to happen. Like, here's what you have to do. I mean, do you have those conversations with aunts and, you know, and your wife probably before you guys go on these trips? Because I know you, like you mentioned, you travel around, you're going to Texas to deer hunt, you're going, you know, all over the place. I'm assuming that you're probably having these same conversations.
We absolutely do. You know, this is another topic, but like I think smartphones and social media are causing the collapse of society, especially in the hands of kids. But Ant's he has a cell phone of his own. Now it is internet disabled. You know, he can't get on social media. He can't even get on the internet with it. He can take pictures and he can make phone calls, and he knows how to do that. He has emergency contacts, and we have those conversations all the time. You know, when we're out hunting, I'll just stop him and say, "Hey, which way's the truck?" You know, and kind of put him on the spot and make him tell me, you know, and ask him, "Did you bring a flashlight? Did you bring your pocket knife? You know, did you bring something besides your Nintendo?" And and so I mean, I think it's a responsibility as a parent if you're going to teach them to do all this fun stuff outside. You do also have to, you know, there is some responsibility, I think, to make them, prepared for the worst that you hope never happens. But, sometimes in the things that we enjoy, you know, the odds are a little higher of something happening out there than they are, you know, at a trip to the, to Walmart or whatever, you know. So, and especially if you start talking about big water duck hunting and boats and bad weather and things, you know, I mean, I've hunted all over the world and hunted, you know, bears. And I don't think there's anything that I've ever done anywhere that I think is more consistently dangerous than big water duck hunting.
Yeah.
And I think most of your big water duck hunters would probably agree. And so, you know, if I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to take my kid out there, I want him to be big enough to respond to a situation if it were to come up, you know. Absolutely.
Before I get you out of here, and you know, you mentioned something that really jumped out to me right there, where you mentioned you have traveled and hunted all over the world. And I always like to ask people, I had Eddie Nickens on here, and it's kind of the same question. You know, what you guys do, you do get the opportunity to travel around and hunt a lot of really, really cool places. And I asked Eddie the same question, but like, what would be, if you were to explain to someone, like, what would be the best waterfowl hunt that you'd ever been on?
One of the best ones I've ever been on was actually an early season teal hunt here on Kentucky Lake, with some of my really close buddies from college. We had been out, and again, this was back when the grass was thick. We had been out scouting these teal day after day after day. And I mean, they was just, you know, the conditions were perfect. And we got out there on opening morning. We got out there like 3:00 in the morning to hold this spot, and had other hunters trying to come in, and it was the whole public land thing. We're shining our lights and letting them know that we were there. And man, it got daylight. And we actually did have 2 other guys come in that we knew, and we welcomed them in. They came and hunted with us. And so we ended up a party of 6, and it got daylight, and everybody shot their 4 teal in under 30 minutes. It was insane. And I mean, they were just landing in the decoys as we were picking up birds. You know, it was just one of those. And I mean, obviously the hunting was fantastic, but just thinking about the company and, that, like I say, it was my buddies, and we were young, and it was public land, and it was right here close. And I don't know, that's a tough one to top. I still think about that hunt.
No, that's a good one. And I think that's really interesting, and something that I talk about all the time is that most of duck hunting is the people you're with, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like, even when it sucks, as long as the people that you're with, fun, good times, even a bad hunt can be, a great time. So I think that kind of plays into it. Like you said, you've hunted all over the world, yet your most memorable favorite hunt is probably with people who are close to you, and at an area where, you're you're familiar with, and everything worked out. So that's interesting. That's a good answer. Not that I was judging your answer on that, but
if you were, you were doing a good job hiding it.
Yeah. Well, Will, we're going to get you out of here. We're up against it on time. This has been fantastic, and I think maybe as we go into the fall a little further, hopefully we can get you over to Arkansas, come to my place, you and Hans come hunt. That'll be fantastic. We'll, especially if you're traveling to Texas, you're going to be driving right past us. So we'll definitely have to do that, and we'll get you back on the podcast, and we'll see how your season shaped up, from deer season to duck season to squirrels, everything you got going on. We'll have to check in with you for sure.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Had fun.
All right, man. Take care. I'd like to thank my guest, Will Brantley, the hunting editor of Field and Stream, for joining us today, talking a little bit of diving ducks on Kentucky Lake, hunting with kids, and just overall great conversation. I'd like to thank Chris Isaac for putting the show together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on DU Podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to the DU Podcast, sponsored by Purina Pro Plan, the official performance dog food of Ducks Unlimited. Purina Pro Plan, always advancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit ducks.org/DU Podcast. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.